I will try to give you some account of the way in which the movement to which I belong has, over the centuries, tried to deal with problems of adversity and persecution. In its organized form, the Unitarian movement came to birth in the turbulent world of 16th century Europe, a period that was certainly marked by adversity and persecution. The Western world was in transition from medievalism to the modern age and was dealing with powerful forces pulling in two directions. On the one hand, there was a revived awareness of the thinking of the ancient civilizations of Greece and Rome, a looking back signaled by the use of the term Renaissance for that period, in English, rebirth. While the same spirit in religion was called the Reformation, which looked back to try to recapture the spirit and the practice of the early church. And the use of the word, of the prefix re in all these terms signals that looking back. And on the other hand, pioneers were looking forward, trying to assess the outcome of experience and experimentation, the most important product of which was the rise of the modern scientific spirit, but which certainly had its impact upon religion too. And the powerful upholders of the status quo felt threatened by both these approaches and resisted them, often violently. Scientists like Galileo were persecuted, but the worst persecutions were in religion, where armed conflict was the result, and Europe was devastated by the so-called wars of religion. And the exhausted combatants eventually signed the Peace of Augsburg in 1555 with its celebrated principle of cuius regio eius religio. Each ruler would be free to dictate his own country's religion. However, this did not mean peace for people like the early Unitarians, who were not content with accepting the religion of whoever happened to be the ruling person in the state, but insisted on coming to their own conclusions on the basis of personal integrity. For them, this was an important principle. They had moved to what a later Unitarian leader, James Martineau, famously called the seat of authority in religion, moved this from the external authority to the individual reason and conscience, something within, which meant that each person would be free to formulate and declare their own beliefs and to tolerate the same freedom for others. The term Unitarian symbolized this emphasis upon unity. Unity within the individual personality, so that you did not profess one thing in religion and act upon another in your everyday living. Unity within the human family, so that you did not discriminate between people on the basis of their religion or culture. Unity between humans and the natural environment, and an ultimate cosmic unity affirmed in theological terms as the unity of God. Now, all this was outrageous to the power structures of the day and resulted in violent persecution. Known Unitarians were thrown into prison if they were lucky, or had their heads cut off, or were burned at the stake if they were unlucky. And there was only one loophole. The Peace of Augsburg had a provision that nonconformists could emigrate to a place where they might be accepted, at least by the standards of the day. And there was one country in Europe which was open in that way. That country was Poland. The largest country in Europe with a wide variety of religions, Catholic and a variety of Protestants, Orthodox, Jews, Muslims. And the political establishment, taking note of what the wars of religion had done to the rest of Europe in such utter devastation, wisely decided that a policy of live and let live made sense economically, socially, and for many of them, even religiously. So Poland became known throughout the continent as the asylum of heretics. And it was there that Unitarians were first free to organize their own congregations. Elsewhere, it was a long, slow process that I can't take time to describe now. But let me just say that in England, for instance, the Act of Toleration of 1689 specifically excluded Unitarians. And it was not till 1813 that Unitarianism was no longer illegal in England, though various disabilities persisted throughout the greater part of the 19th century. In today's world, there are still places where such persecution exists. Pakistan, Uganda are examples, while in Romania, centuries of persecution of Unitarians on religious grounds has now given place to repression of an ethnic minority. Now, how has Unitarian faith enabled its adherents to face persecution and adversity? It's easier to describe what has happened than to say how and why it's happened, when we're dealing with a movement which insists so strongly upon the rights and the responsibilities of each individual. I'll make a few general observations and then speak more personally, although I have to admit that my own first-hand experience of persecution and even of adversity has fortunately been very limited. I've been fortunate. First of all, in recent years, we've tried to articulate a response to life and its various vicissitudes in a set of principles as a guide to action. And they are brief enough for me to share them with you now. Those principles are as follows. We accept the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. A free and responsible search for truth and meaning. The right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. The goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. But principles, after all, are abstractions. And it's not abstractions that really have motivating power within us. Principles have to come alive in persons. It's the example of persons and support from other persons that fortify us to deal with adversity and persecution. And I'm not speaking now simply of support from or example of persons from within our own small tradition, important though that always is. Our more universal approach opens us to persons from all times and places, people whose example and words ring a bell, so to speak, within our own hearts. And here I'll become personal and speak of a few who have rung such a bell for me, though I don't believe that in this I am untypical of Unitarians as a whole. In my personal faith, then, as a Unitarian, I have for many years been inspired by the concise statement expressed by Antonio Gramsci, who experienced adversity and persecution in an extreme form around the time when I was born. His slogan was, "Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will." If you look at the facts of a situation, you can't help being pessimistic, but you can't live by that. You had to say, in spite of everything, I will work for the better. And one long-term exemplar for me, Albert Schweitzer, echoed the same theme. In his autobiography, he wrote, and these are his words, "To the question whether I am a pessimist or an optimist, I answer that my knowledge is pessimistic, but my willing and hoping are optimistic. Ethical acceptance of the world," he added, "contains within itself an optimistic willing and hoping that can never be lost. It is therefore never afraid to face the dismal reality and see it as it really is." And for me, this becomes all the more relevant as we face the immense adversity that threatens us all in these days of seeming impending disaster as a result of what we've been doing to our environment, the home in which we have to live. We should have changed course years ago. And now, with every year that passes, we face a greater possibility that it may be too late. Yet you don't give up. The eminent psychiatrist Erich Fromm wrote years ago, "In matters of life, be it of the individual or of a society, it does not matter whether the chance for cure is 51% or 5%. Life is precarious and unpredictable, and the only way to live it is to make every effort to save it as long as there is a possibility of doing so." And that view was put to practical effect by his fellow psychiatrist, Viktor Frankl, who was an inmate of Auschwitz and never gave up. Those who did give up really sealed their own doom, while those who did not give up still had only a very slim chance of survival, but the possibility was there. And for some, it became a reality. Now, I could go on giving examples of people who've inspired me in this way, but I'll give only one. Václav Havel, who underwent the full effects of adversity and persecution before his release to become president of the Czech Republic, wrote this in his memoir. "If I talk about my notion of the kind of values and ideals I wish to struggle for, this is not to say that I am entertaining the naive hope that this struggle may one day be over. On the contrary, evil will remain with us. No one will ever eliminate human suffering. The political arena will always attract irresponsible and ambitious adventurers and charlatans. And humankind will not stop destroying the world. I have no illusions. But I feel a responsibility to work towards the things I consider good and right. I don't know whether I'll be able to change certain things for the better or not at all. Both outcomes are possible. But there is one thing I will not concede, that it might be meaningless to strive in a good cause." Well, these are just a few of the persons and principles that have sustained me as I follow the Unitarian practice of looking for the right inspiration wherever it may be found. And I can only say that I have found that approach productive, and I'm sure that other Unitarians would say the same. Thank you.